The blue hologram flickered above the metal table, showing a face that looked almost human but wasn't. High Counselor Zareth of the Altarian Empire had skin like polished silver and eyes that glowed with cold fire. His voice came through the speakers with the weight of absolute authority. "People of Earth," Zareth said, his words carefully chosen. "You have exactly 72 standard hours to surrender unconditionally to the Galactic Confederation. Your expansion into restricted space ends now. Your refusal to follow galactic law ends now. Your existence as an independent species ends now." Admiral Sarah Chen sat perfectly still in her chair, watching the hologram with calm eyes. Around her in the underground command bunker, dozens of officers and politicians held their breath. The room was buried 3 miles beneath what used to be Switzerland, protected by layers of steel and rock and energy shields that could stop nuclear weapons. "If you do not surrender," Zareth continued, 17 civilizations have agreed to end the human threat permanently. Our combined fleet numbers 3,047 warships. Each ship can destroy your cities from orbit. We will not show mercy. We will not negotiate. Surrender or die." The hologram vanished, leaving the room in uncomfortable silence. President Martinez, the elected leader of Earth's unified government, cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral Chen," he said, "what are our options?" Sarah Chen was 62 years old. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and scars on her hands from her years as a combat pilot. She had fought alien raiders in the outer colonies. She had seen entire settlements burned from space. She knew exactly what the aliens were capable of. "Our defensive fleet has 43 ships," she said quietly. "The alien fleet has over 3,000. In a straight fight, we would lose in minutes." The politicians around the table looked sick. Senator Williams from the North American Federation put his head in his hands. "So we surrender? After everything we've built out there?" "The colonies," whispered Director Nakamura from the Asian Alliance. "Hundreds of millions of people, what happens to them?" Admiral Chen looked at each face around the table. These people had spent decades arguing about borders and trade agreements. Now they faced the end of everything humanity had achieved among the stars. "The Galactic Confederation doesn't take prisoners," she said. "When they say, 'end the human threat,' they mean every human, every colony, every ship, every space station." The room fell silent again. Through the ventilation system, they could hear the distant hum of the bunker's fusion reactors. Above them, 3 miles of rock and metal, Earth continued its normal day. Most people didn't even know about the alien ultimatum yet. President Martinez spoke first. "Then we fight. Even if we can't win, we fight." "With what?" Senator Williams demanded. 43 ships against 3,000? It's suicide." "Better than slavery," Director Nakamura replied. Admiral Chen listened to them argue and thought about secrets. For 50 years, since humanity's first contact with hostile aliens, Earth had been preparing. Not just building warships and training soldiers, but working on something much bigger, something that violated every treaty the galaxy had about prohibited weapons. "There is another option," she said quietly. The arguing stopped. Everyone looked at her. "What option?" President Martinez asked. Admiral Chen stood up and walked to the wall display. With a gesture, she brought up a map of the solar system. Red dots showed the positions of alien ships. They formed a perfect sphere around the sun, staying just outside the orbit of Pluto. "For 50 years, she said, we've been building more than ships and weapons. We've been building insurance." "What kind of insurance?" Senator Williams asked. Instead of answering, Admiral Chen touched her wrist communicator. "This is Admiral Chen. Authorization code Alpha 77 Prometheus. Activate Damocles Protocol." Somewhere deep in the bunker's computer systems, ancient security locks began opening. Signals traveled through quantum communication networks to hidden facilities around the world. In the deepest parts of Earth's oceans, in sealed chambers beneath mountain ranges and hollowed-out asteroids, people and machines began waking up. "Admiral," President Martinez said carefully, "what exactly is the Damocles Protocol?" Sarah Chen turned back to face the table. In her gray eyes, they could see something that hadn't been there before. Something that looked like hope, but sharper, more dangerous. 50 years ago, when the first alien raiders hit our outer colonies, the survivors sent us detailed scans of their technology. We learned that every galactic civilization follows the same basic rules. They build ships a certain way. They use weapons within certain limits. They fight wars according to treaties signed thousands of years ago. She paused and looked at each face around the table. But humans never signed those treaties. We never agreed to those limits. And for 50 years we've been building something that breaks every rule they think everyone follows. Director Nakamura leaned forward. You're talking about a secret weapon? I'm talking about Project Damocles. The reason we've been mining asteroids faster than we need them. The reason we've been building fusion reactors bigger than any space colony requires. The reason we've been recruiting the best engineers and physicists from every university on Earth and sending them to facilities that officially don't exist. President Martinez looked worried. Admiral, if this weapon exists, why haven't we heard about it? The military budget requests, the resource allocations, the personnel assignments. Where did you hide something that big? Admiral Chen smiled, for the first time since the alien ultimatum arrived. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Mr. President, do you remember the Deep Ocean Mining Initiative from 30 years ago? The project that was supposed to extract minerals from the ocean floor but never seemed to produce much profit? Of course. My predecessor approved the funding. And the Antarctic research expansion? The program that built all those new scientific stations at the South Pole? Yes? The Jupiter Industrial Platform? The massive construction project in the asteroid belt that was supposedly building manufacturing facilities for the outer colonies? President Martinez nodded slowly, understanding beginning to show on his face. None of those projects were what we said they were, Admiral Chen continued. The ocean mining created underwater construction facilities. The Antarctic stations were cover for the largest engineering project in human history. The Jupiter platform was a resource-gathering operation on a scale never attempted before. She turned back to the solar system display and touched a control. New information appeared on the screen. Energy readings, mass projections, power signatures that made the room's computers struggle to display them accurately. For 50 years, we've been building a single ship. Not just any ship. A warship so large and so powerful that it makes every other weapon in the galaxy look like a toy. The politician stared at the numbers on the screen. Senator Williams read them out loud, his voice getting quieter with each figure. Mass, 4.7 trillion tons. Length, 2,000 kilometers. Power output, equivalent to a small star. Weapon systems. He stopped reading and looked up at Admiral Chen. These numbers can't be right. They're conservative estimates, she replied. We won't know the final specifications until the ship finishes its activation sequence. Where is it? Director Blau, Nakamura asked. Something that big. How did you hide it? Admiral Chen touched another control. The display changed to show Earth's oceans. Deep beneath the Pacific, a massive shape became visible. It stretched across tectonic plates like a sleeping giant. The Leviathan has been under construction on the ocean floor for 50 years. We built it in sections, each one disguised as a different project. Deep-sea mining platforms, underwater research stations, geothermal power plants. Individually, none of them seemed important. Together they form a planet killer, President Martinez finished. The largest warship ever built by any species in the galaxy's recorded history, Admiral Chen confirmed. Armed with weapons that exist only in theoretical physics papers, powered by controlled black holes, protected by shields that can absorb the energy output of entire starfleets. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system. Outside, in the alien fleet positioned around the solar system, sensors were beginning to detect unusual energy readings from Earth. Deep space monitoring stations were picking up gravitational anomalies. Something was happening on the third planet from the sun. Something that didn't match any known human technology. How long until it's ready? President Martinez asked. Admiral Chen checked her wrist display. Activation sequence is at 47%. Full operational status in 16 hours. The aliens gave us 72 hours, Senator Williams pointed out. Plenty of time. Time for what? Director Nakamura asked. Even with this superweapon, we're still talking about fighting the entire galaxy. What happens after we win the battle? What happens when they send more fleets? Admiral Chen's smile grew wider. Director, you're still thinking like the aliens expect us to think. You're assuming we built one ship to fight their 3,000 ships. You're assuming we're planning to have a battle. She turned to face them all, and in her eyes they could see something that made them understand why she had been chosen to lead Earth's defenses. We didn't build the Leviathan to fight a war. We built it to end wars, all of them, forever. Before anyone could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the bunker. Red lights flashed on every wall display. A technician at the communications station looked up with wide eyes. Admiral, we're getting massive energy readings from the Pacific Ocean. Seismic stations are detecting movement along the entire ocean floor, and, he paused, checking his instruments again. Ma'am, we're getting reports of tsunamis forming in a perfect circle around coordinates that match your classified files. Admiral Chen nodded calmly. Right on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you prepare for the most important day in human history. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, something that had been sleeping for 50 years opened its eyes. The Leviathan was waking up, and the galaxy was about to learn why humans had been considered the apex predators of Earth long before they reached the stars. The countdown to humanity's ultimatum had begun. War Admiral Thezcol of the Hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his tactical displays with growing confusion. His ship, the Eternal Dominance, was the largest warship in the combined alien fleet. It stretched for 12 kilometers and carried enough firepower to crack moons. Around him, 3,000 other ships waited in perfect formation, ready to reduce Earth to smoking ruins. But something was wrong with the readings. Tactical Officer Vex, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 47 star systems. Explain these energy signatures. The young officer's forearms moved quickly over his control panel. His species, the Hegemony's best sensor operators, had evolved to process multiple data streams simultaneously. But right now, he looked confused. War Admiral, we're detecting massive power buildups from the third planet. Energy output is increasing by orders of magnitude every few minutes, but we can't identify the source. Thezcol walked closer to the main display. The image showed Earth as a small blue dot surrounded by their fleet, but the energy readings made it look like a star was being born in Earth's oceans. Impossible, he muttered. Human technology is primitive. They barely have fusion power. They can't generate these kinds of energy levels. On the bridge of another ship, Captain Ziltar of the Altarian Navy was having the same conversation with her crew. The Altarians had been studying human technology for decades. They knew exactly what Earth cities could produce, what their space stations could build, what their defensive platforms could do. This was something else entirely. Captain, her science officer reported, the energy readings are focused beneath Earth's largest ocean. Whatever they're building down there, it's big. How big? She asked. The science officer checked his instruments 3 times before answering. Ma'am, if these readings are accurate, the object under construction has a mass greater than some moons. Captain Ziltar felt a cold fear growing in her stomach. In her culture, fear was considered a weakness. But right now, watching the impossible energy signatures coming from a planet they thought they understood, she couldn't help feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. Deep beneath Earth's Pacific Ocean, the Leviathan was coming to life. The ship had been built in sections over 50 years, each piece carefully designed to look like something innocent. Underwater mining platforms that were actually weapon batteries, deep-sea research stations that were actually shield generators, geothermal power plants that were actually the feeding mechanisms for contained black holes. Now, as the activation sequence continued, those separate pieces were connecting and integrating and becoming something that had never existed before in the galaxy's history. In the ship's central core, an artificial intelligence called Prometheus opened its electronic eyes and began to think. It had been dreaming for 50 years, learning from every piece of intercepted alien communication, every captured piece of enemy technology, every report from human spies and galactic civilization. Prometheus knew the location of every alien homeworld. It knew the weaknesses in their defensive systems. It knew their military strategies, their political structures, their trade routes, and their deepest fears. For 50 years, it had been preparing for this moment. "Admiral Chen," Prometheus said, its voice speaking simultaneously in the ocean depths and in the command bunker 3 miles beneath Switzerland. "All systems are activating normally. Estimated time to full operational status, 14 hours, 37 minutes. In the bunker, Admiral Chen nodded to her staff. Around the table, the politicians who had been arguing about surrender 15 minutes ago now sat in stunned silence watching displays that showed their planet's transformation. "Prometheus," she said, "begin Phase 1 of the Revelation Protocol." "Understood, Admiral. Initiating surface breach." Across the Pacific Ocean, the water began to move in ways that violated physics. Massive circular waves formed and spread outward from a central point. The waves weren't chaotic like a natural disaster. They were perfectly controlled, perfectly timed, forming geometric patterns that could only be artificial. Satellite networks around Earth began broadcasting images of the phenomenon. Within minutes, every major news organization on the planet was showing the same impossible sight. The Pacific Ocean was lifting upward in a dome shape 500 kilometers across. In the alien fleet, alarm signals began sounding on every ship. "War Admiral," Tactical Officer Vex shouted, his 4 arms working frantically over his controls. "Something is rising from the planet's ocean. Mass readings are... This can't be right." Thezcol stared at his main display as the readings updated. The object emerging from Earth's ocean had a mass of nearly 5 trillion tons. It was larger than most asteroids. It was rising through kilometers of water, as if the ocean itself was helping lift it into space. "All ships," he commanded on the fleet communication channel. "Battle stations, prepare for unknown threat." But even as he gave the order, Thezcol felt doubt creeping into his mind. The hegemony had fought thousands of battles against hundreds of different species. He had personally commanded fleets that destroyed entire civilizations, but he had never seen anything like what was emerging from Earth's ocean. The Leviathans. Hull broke the surface of the Pacific like a metal mountain rising from the depths. Water poured off its sides in torrents that created new weather patterns across the planet. The ship's main hull was 2,000 kilometers long and 300 kilometers wide. Its weapons towers stretched upward like the spires of impossible cities. But size wasn't the most frightening thing about the Leviathan. The most frightening thing was that it didn't look like any ship design in the galaxy's database. Every spacefaring civilization built their ships according to certain principles. They used certain materials, certain power systems, certain weapon configurations. These standards had been developed over millions of years of galactic warfare. They represented the most efficient ways to build warships. The Leviathan ignored every single one of those principles. Its hull was made of materials that didn't appear in any periodic table. Its power systems generated energy signatures that shouldn't exist. Its weapon hardpoints were positioned in configurations that made no tactical sense according to conventional military doctrine. It was as if humans had looked at millions of years of galactic military engineering and decided to build something completely different. "Captain," the Altarian science officer whispered, "are you seeing these readings?" Captain Ziltar nodded, unable to speak. Her instruments were showing power, signatures that exceeded some stars, gravitational fields that bent space around the human ship, energy patterns that suggested technologies her civilization had only theorized about. "How?" she finally managed to ask. "How did they build this?" Her science officer was silent for a long moment, running calculations and comparisons and probability assessments. When he finally answered, his voice was small and frightened. "Captain, I don't think they built it using any known technology. The power requirements alone, they would need to be harnessing black holes, multiple black holes, and the materials science, Some of these hull readings suggest they've learned to manipulate matter at the quantum level. That's impossible. No species has that technology. No known species, he corrected. As the Leviathan continued rising from Earth's ocean, its communications array began broadcasting on all galactic frequencies. The message was simple and was transmitted in every known language simultaneously. Attention Galactic Confederation Fleet. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. You gave us 72 hours to surrender. We decline your generous offer. The voice was calm and polite, as if discussing the weather rather than responding to a threat of total annihilation. Instead, we would like to make a counteroffer. You have 1 hour to withdraw your fleet from our solar system. After that time, we will consider your presence an act of war, and we will respond accordingly. War Admiral Thezkol felt his breathing quicken. No species had ever spoken to the Galactic Confederation like that. No single planet had ever threatened a combined fleet of 17 civilizations. Furthermore, Admiral Chen's voice continued, we want to make something very clear to every captain, every crew member, and every government watching this transmission. Humanity tried to join your galactic community peacefully. We tried to follow your laws and respect your borders. You responded by declaring us a threat and threatening genocide. The transmission paused, and for a moment the only sound in space was the background radiation of distant stars. You made a mistake. A very big mistake. You assumed that because we're new to space, we're weak. You assumed that because our technology looks primitive, we're helpless. You assumed that because we come from one small planet, we can't possibly threaten your great galactic civilizations. Another pause. On the alien ships, thousands of officers and crew members listened with growing unease. You were wrong about all of that, but your biggest mistake was assuming that humans would go quietly into extinction. We are the apex predators of a death world. We didn't climb to the top of our food chain by giving up when faced with bigger threats. We got there by becoming the biggest threat. As Admiral Chen spoke, the Leviathan completed its rise from Earth's ocean. The massive ship hung in the planet's atmosphere like a metal moon, its weapon systems powering up and its shield generators creating visible distortions in space around its hull. You wanted to see what humanity is capable of when faced with extinction. Congratulations, you're about to find out. The transmission ended, leaving the alien fleet in stunned silence. War Admiral Thezkol looked at his tactical displays and tried to process what he was seeing. The human ship's power output was still climbing. Its weapon systems were unlike anything in the Confederation's databases. Its shields were generating energy fields that his sensors couldn't properly analyze. War Admiral, Tactical Officer O, Vex said quietly. What are your orders? Thezkol studied the readings for another few seconds, then reached for his communication controls. He had spent his entire career following the hegemony's military doctrine, which said that any threat to galactic stability should be eliminated immediately and completely. But military doctrine hadn't prepared him for this. All ships, he commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet communication network. Maintain position, do not engage unless directly attacked, and send a priority message to Hegemony Command. Tell them we may need reinforcements. In the depths of space, 3,000 warships watched a single human vessel complete its activation sequence and tried to understand how everything they thought they knew about warfare had just changed forever. The Leviathan didn't attack immediately. Instead, it did something far more frightening to the alien fleet watching from the outer solar system. It began to demonstrate exactly what humanity had built during 50 years of secret preparation. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the Leviathan's command center, a vast chamber deep in the ship's core where holographic displays showed every detail of the solar system. Around her, human officers worked at control stations that used technology decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen before. Prometheus, she said to the ship's artificial intelligence, begin the demonstration sequence. I want every ship in that fleet to understand exactly what they're facing. Understood, Admiral. Beginning with Resource Acquisition Display Alpha. The massive ship turned toward the asteroid belt with movements that were impossibly smooth for something so large. Its engines didn't produce the bright plasma trails that most starships used. Instead, they bent space itself, allowing the Leviathan to move without actually pushing against anything. War Admiral Thezakol watched from his flagship as the human vessel approached a cluster of asteroids. His tactical officers were feeding him data that made no sense according to everything they knew about physics. War Admiral, Tactical Officer Vex reported, "The human ship is not using conventional propulsion. Our sensors detect no reaction mass, no energy expenditure for thrust. It appears to be folding space around itself." "That's impossible," Thezakol replied, but even as he said it, he knew he was watching something that shouldn't exist. "No, species has mastered space-time manipulation. The energy requirements would be enormous. Sir, their power output is already exceeding some star systems, and it's still climbing." The Leviathan reached the asteroid field and stopped beside a massive chunk of iron and nickel that was roughly the size of a small moon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the human ship extended what looked like metallic tentacles toward the asteroid, but they weren't tentacles. They were something much more advanced. "Matter conversion beams," whispered Captain Ziltar of the Altarian Navy, watching from her own ship. Her science officer was running analysis after analysis, trying to understand what they were seeing. "Captain, the human ship is breaking down the asteroid at the molecular level and rebuilding it as ship components. The conversion rate is impossible. They're processing millions of tons of raw material per second." As the alien fleet watched in growing horror, the asteroid began to shrink, but the Leviathan began to grow. New armor plating formed along its hull. Additional weapon towers sprouted from its superstructure. New shield generators appeared and began powering up. Within an hour, the asteroid was completely gone, and the human ship was 15% larger than before. "They're building themselves a bigger ship while we watch," Thezakol muttered, "using raw materials as construction resources in real time. War Admiral, if they can do this with asteroids, what happens if they reach a planet? What happens if they reach our homeworlds?" Thezakol didn't answer because he couldn't think of an answer that didn't terrify him. The Leviathan moved to another asteroid and repeated the process. Then another. Each time, the ship grew larger and more powerful. Each time, the alien fleet's chances of victory grew smaller. But Admiral Chen wasn't finished with her demonstration. "Prometheus, initiate weapons test Alpha. Target the dead moon in the outer system. Non-inhabited designation confirmed." "Confirmed, Admiral. The target moon has no life signatures, no settlements, no strategic value. It is an ideal demonstration target. Proceed." The Leviathan turned toward a small dead moon orbiting one of the gas giants. The moon was roughly the size of Earth's moon, made mostly of rock and ice. It had been dead for billions of years, and would remain dead for billions more. Or so everyone thought. The human ship's main weapon began to charge. The energy buildup was visible from across the solar system, as space itself began to bend and twist around the Leviathan's forward guns. "What kind of weapon system is that?" Captain Ziltar demanded of her science officer. I don't know, Captain. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. It appears to be some kind of gravity-based system, but the power levels are..." He never finished the sentence because the Leviathan fired. The weapon wasn't a beam or a projectile in any conventional sense. Instead, it was a controlled gravitational wave that reached across millions of kilometers in seconds and struck the dead moon with the force of a collapsing star. The moon didn't explode. It didn't shatter into pieces. It simply collapsed in on itself, compressed into a point of infinite density that became a tiny black hole. Then, before the black hole could begin consuming nearby matter, the Leviathan's weapon system grabbed it and flung it out of the solar system at nearly the speed of light. The entire demonstration took less than 30 seconds. In the alien fleet, every sensor operator and tactical officer and weapons specialist stared at their instruments in complete silence. What they had just witnessed was beyond their understanding of physics, engineering, and military science. "They turned a moon into a black hole," someone whispered on the hegemony communication channel. "Then they threw it away like garbage." War Admiral Thezakol felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service. Genuine fear. Not fear of death, which was always present in battle, but fear of facing an enemy so far beyond his understanding that conventional tactics meant nothing. "All ships," he said quietly, "prepare to withdraw from the system." But before his fleet could begin moving, the Leviathan opened communication channels to every ship simultaneously, not through their main communication arrays, but through their personal systems, their internal networks, their private channels. Somehow, the human ship was talking directly to individual crew members on thousands of different vessels. "Attention, alien fleet," Admiral Chen's voice said, speaking inside the heads of every officer and crew member through their neural implants and personal communicators. "Before you leave, there are a few things you need to understand." Panic spread through the fleet as officers realized that their most secure systems had been compromised. Communication networks that were supposed to be impossible to hack were carrying the human admiral's voice directly to their brains. "First," Admiral Chen continued, "we know who you are. We know the names of your ships, your crew members, your families back home. We know your military capabilities, your trade routes, your diplomatic secrets, your planet's defensive systems." Captain Ziltar tried to cut her communication channels, but Admiral Chen's voice continued speaking inside her. "Head. Second, we know your histories. We know about the Altarian experiments on sentient species. We know about the hegemony's planned elimination of inferior races. We know about the Confederation Council's manipulation of trade routes to starve developing worlds. We know about all of it." Across the fleet, officers and crew members began looking at each other with suspicion and fear. Classified secrets that were known only to the highest levels of government were being broadcast to common soldiers and technicians. "Third," Admiral Chen said, her voice now carrying an edge of cold anger, "we know you came here expecting to commit genocide. You didn't come to negotiate. You didn't come to establish peaceful relations. You came to murder every human being in the galaxy because we refused to bow down to your authority." The silence in the alien fleet was complete. On thousands of ships, beings from dozens of different species listened to a human voice speaking truths they didn't want to hear. "So now you have a choice," Admiral Chen continued. "You can stay here and find out what happens when you threaten the extinction of a species that built this ship. Or you can leave, go back to your governments, and explain that humanity is no longer asking for permission to exist." War Admiral Tezekol found his voice. "Human Admiral, you speak as if one ship can threaten the entire galaxy. We have thousands of worlds, millions of ships, billions of soldiers." Admiral Chen's answer came immediately, and when she spoke, her voice carried the absolute confidence of someone holding unbeatable cards. "War Admiral Tezekol of the Hegemony flagship Eternal Dominance, you're thinking like your military academies taught you to think. You're counting ships and soldiers and planets as if this was a conventional war." Tezekol felt ice form in his veins as he realized the human knew his name, his ship's name, probably his entire military record. "This isn't a conventional war," Admiral Chen continued. "Your fleets can't catch us, your weapons can't hurt us, your defenses can't stop us, and most importantly, your governments can't hide from us." As she spoke, new information began appearing on every alien ship's communication screens: military deployment schedules, secret government communications, personal files of high-ranking officials, financial records showing corruption and illegal activities. "We've been watching you for 50 years. We've been learning your languages, studying your cultures, mapping your territories, and preparing responses to every possible threat you might pose. While you were thinking of humans as primitive newcomers to space, we were becoming something you never expected." The data streams continued flowing to every ship in the fleet. Decades of carefully guarded secrets were being revealed to ordinary soldiers and junior officers who had never been trusted with such information. "You made one final mistake," Admiral Chen said, her voice now carrying a note of sadness mixed with determination. "You assumed that because we're new to galactic civilization, we don't understand how it really works. But we understand perfectly." She paused, and in that pause, every alien in the fleet realized that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. "Your civilization is built on fear and intimidation. You maintain order by threatening destruction to anyone who won't submit. You've convinced yourselves that this makes you strong, That this makes you civilized. Another pause. We're about to show you what real strength looks like, what real civilization looks like, and what happens when a species that survived as apex predators on a death world decides to protect not just themselves, but everyone you've been bullying for thousands of years. The communication ended, leaving the alien fleet in stunned silence. War Admiral Thezkol looked at his tactical displays and tried to count the ways this situation had become impossible. His fleet outgunned the humans by a factor of thousands to one. His ships were crewed by experienced warriors from civilizations that had conquered half the galaxy. His governments controlled resources that spanned entire star systems. None of that mattered anymore. The humans had built something that changed all the rules. They had created a single weapon that could threaten every world in the galaxy. And they had demonstrated that they understood galactic civilization better than the aliens who had created it. War Admiral, Tactical Officer Vex said quietly, "What are your orders?" Thezkol studied the energy readings from the human ship for another moment, then made the hardest decision of his military career. "Signal the fleet," he said. "We're withdrawing from the system, and send a message to every government in the Confederation. Tell them that the rules have changed. Tell them that humanity is no longer asking for permission." As the alien fleet began its retreat from the solar system, the Leviathan hung in space like a metal promise of things to come. The demonstration was over, but the real test was just beginning. The alien fleet began its withdrawal from the solar system, but the retreat turned into something much worse than a military defeat. It became a psychological collapse that spread through galactic civilization like a virus. Within hours of the demonstration, quantum communication networks were carrying the news to every corner of the galaxy. The images of the Leviathan rising from Earth's oceans played on countless screens. The recordings of Admiral Chen's broadcast were analyzed by military experts who couldn't explain what they were seeing. But the real damage wasn't done by the ship itself. It was done by the information the ship had revealed. In the capital city of the hegemony homeworld, Chancellor Vakhtar sat in his private office reading classified reports that should have been impossible for humans to access. Military plans that were known only to the highest levels of government. Records of secret experiments that violated every galactic treaty. Financial documents showing decades of corruption and illegal resource allocation. All of it had been broadcast to common soldiers and junior officers throughout the hegemony fleet. Within hours, it was spreading through civilian communication networks. Within days, it would reach every world in hegemony space. How? He asked his intelligence director, a scarred veteran of 100 covert operations. How did the humans get this information? "We don't know, Chancellor. Our most secure systems show no signs of infiltration. Our quantum encryption should be unbreakable. But somehow, they have everything. Personnel files, military strategies, diplomatic communications, even our plans for dealing with internal dissent." Chancellor Vakhtar felt something cold and heavy settling in his stomach. The hegemony controlled 47 star systems through a combination of military might and careful information management. Their subject population stayed quiet because they didn't know how many others were suffering under hegemony rule. They accepted their situation because they believed resistance was hopeless. But if every world in hegemony space suddenly learned about every other world, about the true extent of hegemony crimes, about the military weaknesses that were carefully hidden from public knowledge. "Sir," his intelligence director continued, "there's more. The humans didn't just steal our information. They've been sharing it with our subject populations. Rebel groups that have been fighting us for years suddenly have detailed intelligence about our military deployments, our supply lines, our government structure, and 17 worlds have declared independence in the last 6 hours. 12 more have had major uprisings begin. Our regional governors are reporting that they can no longer maintain order." Chancellor Vakhtar walked to the window of his office and looked out over the capital city. Below him, crowds were gathering in the streets. His security forces were trying to maintain order, but they were vastly outnumbered by civilians who had suddenly learned truths their government had hidden for generations. The same scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On the Altarian homeworld, Emperor Zixthol found himself facing the largest civil uprising in his civilization's history. The Altarians had built their empire on the belief that they were genetically superior to other species. Their citizens accepted military service and high taxes because they believed they were spreading civilization to primitive worlds. But the humans had revealed the truth about Altarian civilization. The experiments on sentient beings, the deliberate destruction of indigenous cultures, the forced sterilization programs designed to eliminate inferior genetic lines. The riots are spreading to every major city, reported General Kolthan, the Emperor's military advisor. Our peacekeeping forces are overwhelmed. Many of our own soldiers are refusing orders now that they know what we've really been doing in the occupied territories. Emperor Zixthol had ruled for 3 centuries through careful control of information and ruthless suppression of dissent. Now, in the space of a single day, his entire social order was collapsing. What about the military? He asked. Can we maintain order through force? General Kolthan looked uncomfortable. Sir, many of our officers are questioning their loyalty. The human information release included personal files on military personnel. Many of our commanders have discovered that their families were lied to about their deaths in battle. Others have learned about the true casualty rates of our expansion campaigns. You're telling me that our own military is turning against us? I'm telling you that our military has learned the truth about what we've been asking them to do. Many of them don't like it. The Emperor walked to his communication console and tried to contact his regional governors. Half of them didn't respond. The ones who did answer reported the same story. Massive uprisings, military units refusing orders, colonial populations declaring independence. The Altarian Empire was dissolving in real time. Similar conversations were happening in government. Buildings across the galaxy, the crystalline hegemony, rulers of 1,000 worlds found their authority crumbling as subject populations learned about systematic resource theft and cultural genocide. The Federation of Trade Worlds discovered that their carefully maintained economic monopolies were collapsing as exploited colonies gained access to suppressed technologies. But the most devastating blow came when the humans began their second demonstration. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the Leviathan's command center, watching holographic displays that showed the chaos spreading throughout galactic civilization. Governments were falling. Military units were mutinying. Colonial populations were demanding freedom. Prometheus, she said. Are you ready for Phase 2 of the Revelation Protocol? Yes, Admiral. All target systems have been mapped. Communication networks are fully infiltrated. Defense systems have been analyzed and countered. Then let's show them what happens when you threaten genocide against a species that's been preparing for 50 years. The Leviathan disappeared. One moment it was hanging in Earth's atmosphere like a metallic moon. The next moment it was gone, leaving only empty space and confused sensor readings. It reappeared 18 hours later in orbit around the hegemony capital world, having crossed 400 light-years in less than a day. The planet's defensive systems, designed to stop any known form of attack, registered the Leviathan's arrival and immediately went to full alert. Orbital defense platforms powered up their weapons. Planetary shield generators activated. Military bases scrambled their fighter squadrons. None of it mattered. The Leviathan didn't attack the planet's defenses. It simply ignored them. The orbital platforms fired their most powerful weapons, only to watch the energy beams bend around the human ship as if it existed in a different dimension. The planetary shields designed to stop planet-killing asteroids had no effect on a vessel that could manipulate space-time itself. Instead of destroying the planet, the Leviathan did something far more frightening. It began broadcasting directly to every communication device on the planet's surface. Citizens of the hegemony capital world, Admiral Chen's voice said, speaking simultaneously in every language used on the planet. Your government has ruled through fear and deception for centuries. Today, that ends. As she spoke, holographic displays appeared in every city, every town, every settlement on the planet. The displays showed detailed records of hegemony crimes, images of destroyed worlds, videos of military operations that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Financial records showing how the wealth of conquered peoples had been stolen and distributed among hegemony elite. But most devastating of all, the displays showed the true cost of hegemony expansion. The billions of beings who had died in wars of conquest, the cultures that had been deliberately destroyed, the worlds that had been stripped of resources and left as dead rocks floating in space. For too long, Admiral Chen continued, you have been told that your suffering was necessary for galactic stability. You have been told that your sacrifices were protecting civilization from chaos. You have been lied to. The holographic displays changed to show something new, detailed plans for a different kind of future. Technologies that could eliminate scarcity, medical advances that could extend life and reduce suffering, social systems that could provide security without oppression. Humanity offers you a choice, Admiral Chen said. You can continue living under governments that view you as expendable resources in their power games, or you can join us in building something better. Similar broadcasts were happening simultaneously on dozens of other worlds throughout the galaxy. The Leviathan wasn't just visiting the hegemony capital. It was appearing everywhere at once, speaking to populations that had been oppressed and lied to for generations. Chancellor Vaktar watched from his underground bunker as his capital city erupted in the largest celebration in the planet's history. Citizens poured into the streets not to riot but to rejoice. For the first time in centuries, they had hope for something better than endless service to an uncaring government. Sir, his military advisor reported, our defense fleet is requesting permission to surrender to the human ship. Surrender? Why would they surrender? The humans haven't attacked us. No, sir, but they've offered asylum to any military personnel who refuse to continue serving in our expansion wars. They've also offered advanced technology and economic assistance to any world that chooses independence from the hegemony. Chancellor Vaktar felt his last hope disappearing. And our commanders are accepting these offers? Sir, most of our fleet commanders have families on conquered worlds. They've just learned what happened to those families during our occupation campaigns. They're not interested in continuing to serve a government that murdered their loved ones. The Chancellor looked at his communication displays and watched as report after report came in from across the galaxy. The same pattern was repeating everywhere. The humans weren't conquering galactic civilization. They were offering it a better alternative, and everywhere they made that offer, populations were accepting it eagerly. Sir, his advisor said quietly, I'm receiving reports that the human ship has left our system. But before it departed, it transmitted detailed technical specifications for advanced terraforming equipment, fusion power systems, and medical technologies to our civilian population. Why would they do that? I believe, sir, that they're trying to demonstrate what galactic civilization could look like if it was based on cooperation instead of domination. Chancellor Vaktar sat in his bunker and watched his empire crumble, not through conquest but through the simple act of offering his subjects something better than fear and oppression. For the first time in his long career, he began to wonder if perhaps the humans were right about more than just military technology. Perhaps they were right about civilization itself. Outside, in the streets of his capital city, millions of beings celebrated the first day of freedom they had known in generations. The age of galactic empires built on fear and domination was ending. Something new was being born. 2 years later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Leviathan, looking out at something that would have been impossible to imagine when the great ship first rose from Earth's oceans. Before her stretched a vast construction, project that spanned an entire star system, where beings from dozens of different species worked together on the largest engineering undertaking in galactic history. They were building a gateway. Not just a simple jump point or hyperspace relay, but a permanent portal that would connect this galaxy to others beyond the visible universe. Humanity's sights had always been set on the horizon, and now that they had transformed their own galaxy, they were looking toward infinite new frontiers. Admiral, Prometheus said, its voice carrying a note of satisfaction that had developed over the past 2 years of unexpected peace. The Altarian delegation has arrived for the ceremony. Former Emperor Zixthal personally wishes to thank you for the liberation of his people. Sarah smiled at the irony. The former emperor, who had once ruled through genetic superiority and military oppression, now served as an elected representative of a free Altarian republic. His people had chosen him not because of his royal bloodline, but because he had been one of the first leaders to embrace the new galactic order. And the hegemony representatives? Chancellor Vokhtar is leading a trade mission to establish economic partnerships with 17 former subject worlds. He says he has never been happier to be unemployed as a dictator. The transformation of galactic civilization hadn't happened through conquest or forced revolution. Instead, humanity had offered something simple but revolutionary: a choice. Every world, every government, every individual being could choose between the old system of fear and domination or a new system based on cooperation and mutual benefit. Most had chosen the new way. The few that hadn't were simply left alone, isolated, in their own systems while the rest of the galaxy moved forward. Some of them, like the crystalline hegemony's core world, still maintained their old power structures, but they found themselves increasingly irrelevant as their former subjects built prosperous, peaceful societies without them. Admiral, her communications officer, called from across the observation deck. "We're receiving the final status reports from the colony fleets." Sarah turned to listen, though she already knew what the reports would say. Over the past 2 years, humanity had launched the largest expansion effort in galactic history. Not expansion through conquest, but expansion through invitation. Thousands of worlds had requested human assistance in rebuilding their societies, developing their technologies, and protecting themselves from the few remaining aggressive powers. Fleet 7 reports successful establishment of the Rigel Commonwealth. 43 worlds have joined the Mutual Defense Pact, with full technological sharing agreements in place. Fleet 12 has completed the terraforming project in the Vega sector. The former desert worlds now support 18 billion beings from 12 different species. Fleet 21 reports that the Andromeda Gateway project is ahead of schedule. First test of intergalactic communication will begin in 6 months. Sarah nodded at each report, but her attention was focused on the larger picture. Humanity had done more than survive the galaxy's attempt to destroy them. They had fundamentally changed what galactic civilization meant. The old system had been based on a simple principle: the strong dominated the weak. Powerful civilizations conquered weaker ones. Resources flowed upward to elite governments while ordinary beings suffered and died for the glory of empires they had no voice in. Humanity had introduced a different principle: the strong protected the weak. Advanced civilizations helped developing ones. Resources were shared to eliminate scarcity and suffering. Everyone had a voice in the societies they belonged to. "Prometheus," Sarah said, "what's the current status of our military readiness?" "Admiral, we maintain 47 Leviathan-class vessels in active service, with construction proceeding on 16 more. However, I should note that we have not needed to fire a shot in anger for 18 months. This was the part that surprised even Sarah. The Leviathan had been built as a weapon of war, designed to fight impossible odds against overwhelming enemies. But its greatest victory had been making war itself unnecessary. When any species could build star-destroying weapons, when any planet could defend itself with reality-bending technology, when any government could be exposed and held accountable by artificial intelligences that spanned galactic communication networks, the old incentives for conquest and domination simply disappeared. Who would bother conquering a world when cooperation provided better access to that world's resources? Why would anyone start a war when the likely outcome was mutual annihilation? How could any government maintain power through oppression when their citizens had access to technologies that made authoritarian control impossible? "Admiral," her tactical officer reported, "we're receiving a priority communication from Earth. President Martinez wants to speak with you personally." Sarah accepted the communication, and President Martinez's holographic image appeared on the observation deck. The man had aged considerably during the past 2 years, but he looked happier than she had ever seen him. "Admiral Chen," he said, "I'm calling to inform you that the Global Parliament has reached a decision about your request. And your request to resign from military service has been denied. However, your request to be reassigned has been approved." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Reassigned to what? The new position we're creating for you, Director of Galactic Development. Your job will be to oversee humanity's expansion beyond this galaxy and to serve as our ambassador to any civilizations we encounter in other regions of the universe. Sarah looked out at the Gateway construction project, where beings who had been enemies just 2 years ago now worked together to reach toward infinite new possibilities. What about the Leviathan fleet? Prometheus has volunteered to continue, coordinating our defensive capabilities. But frankly, Admiral, we don't expect to need them much longer. The old model of galactic civilization is dying out. The few remaining aggressive powers are either reforming themselves or becoming increasingly isolated. President Martinez paused and looked directly at her through the holographic display. Sarah, do you realize what you've accomplished? You didn't just save humanity from extinction. You ended the age of galactic empires. You made it possible for billions of beings to live free lives for the first time in their species' histories. Sarah considered this for a moment, then shook her head. Mr. President, I didn't accomplish anything. Humanity accomplished it. Every engineer who worked on the Leviathan project, every scientist who developed the technologies we shared with other worlds, every diplomat who helped former enemies become friends, every citizen who chose cooperation over domination. She gestured toward the Gateway construction project. This is what humans do when we're not fighting for survival. We build, we explore, we reach toward new horizons, and we bring anyone who wants to come along with us. The conversation ended, and Sarah returned her attention to the reports flowing in from across the galaxy. Construction projects on 1,000 worlds. Scientific research that was advancing at unprecedented rates now that different species were sharing knowledge freely. Cultural exchanges that were creating new forms of art, literature, and philosophy. And beyond it all, the Gateway project that would soon allow them to reach toward other galaxies, other possibilities, other frontiers that no one had ever imagined. Admiral, Prometheus said, I have been analyzing the social and technological developments of the past 2 years. Would you like to hear my assessment? Go ahead. The transformation of galactic civilization has exceeded all predictions. War between major powers has essentially ceased. Economic inequality has been reduced by 73%. Scientific advancement has accelerated by a factor of 12. Individual freedom and self-determination have increased beyond measurable levels. And I believe we are witnessing the birth of something entirely new. Not just a reformed version of the old galactic civilization, but a completely different model for how intelligent species can coexist and thrive. Sarah nodded. What do you think comes next? The universe is vast, Admiral. There are billions of other galaxies, each potentially containing billions of intelligent species. Some of them may have developed the same oppressive systems that once dominated this galaxy. Others may have found different solutions to the challenges of civilization. Prometheus paused, and when it continued, its voice carried a note of excitement. That sounded almost human. I believe humanity's greatest adventure is just beginning, and this time we won't be facing it alone. Sarah looked out at the Gateway project, where the final components were being installed by crews representing dozens of different species. Soon, that gateway would open, and they would take their first steps into territories beyond anyone's imagination. Behind them, in the galaxy they had transformed, billions of beings lived in freedom and prosperity that had been unthinkable just 2 years ago. Ahead of them lay infinite possibilities and infinite challenges. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans had always thrived in. Prometheus, she said, begin preparations for the first intergalactic expedition, and send a message to every world in our alliance. Anyone who wants to join us in exploring the universe is welcome to come. As the Great Gateway neared completion, and the first tests of intergalactic travel began, Admiral Sarah Chen smiled and thought about the day when Earth had raised its planet-killer warship and civilizations had collapsed and pleaded for mercy. They had begged for mercy, and humanity had given them something better. It had given them hope. Now they were all reaching toward the stars together, and the universe itself was waiting to see what they would accomplish next.